Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. There's a little event which is going on today for Italian Navy Day, and there is a decal and also a returning premium that has come back. Basically, if you complete 3 battles using Italian naval vessels at rank 3 or higher, you'll get the MAS 15 decal, which looks really nice. It basically looks like a sticker of the MAS 15, or the MAS, I suppose. I'm hoping that they continue with this style, because every year or so they do have like different styles for different types of decals, and I like the idea of having a bunch of sticker ones that you can just stick in places. The vehicle that has returned is the Geniere, or the RN Geniere. It's a standard destroyer. It's back for 3,850 Golden Eagles, and we'll have a look at it in-game for you. This vehicle is available until the 13th of June, so you basically have 3 days to make the decision whether you want to pick it up or not. So the Geniere is a rank 3 Soldati class, so that's at least one of the positives that it has access to. The other Soldats class we have, the Corazier, is at 4.3 as well, but it's in rank 2. So if you want to basically bump up your dailies, you can do with this. The problem is the Verrazano, which is the Navigatori class, is also rank 3, so that doesn't really matter once you get that vehicle. The Geniere is pretty weak. I'm not going to lie about it. It's a vehicle with very weak firepower, very weak secondaries, and also just very weak survivability. One of the marketing things that they try to do with these Italian destroyers is make them fast. So basically make them something which is a little bit speedy around the place. Basically making it so they seem like they can outrun everything and everything like that. The problem is they can't. They're slightly faster, if not faster at all, than some of the vehicles around, and that's about it. So stuff like the Geniere doesn't really have an advantage. The 120s themselves have a pretty low fire rate, or the same fire rate as many others, and also low DPM. They do have access to a HE shell, which has only 1.63 kilos of explosive mass, which is worse than a lot of reserve vehicles that exist. And the APHE BC, pen's okay, but once again the explosive mass isn't huge. So these vehicles just don't feel very good. The torpedoes also are some of the weakest that are around, and once again, you don't have a lot of crew, and you have some very large spaces where you can just get annihilated. It does have these 20mm, the Breda dual mounts, so at least you have some air touch-ins, but it just doesn't work as a vehicle. It just gets beaten up by a lot of the meta vehicles. It's much better to go for some of the other vehicles that are around. If you want to grind through the Italian destroyers quickly, this one, the other Geniere, is the way to go. But also, the key to the naval blue water tree for Italy is actually the Trento, the Raimondo, the Eugenia, and the Bolzano. These 4 vehicles are really fun, along with the Bartolomeo Colleoni. All these other vehicles which are here are weak. There isn't really anything that fits very well, apart from the Impetuoso, and that's basically because of its American armament. So yeah, stuff like the Geniere here, or even the EVGA, are rough vehicles, and I would not recommend buying them. I'd recommend just grinding through the tree and getting to the nice areas of the tech tree. So I thought in this video we would also talk about when Gaijin has tried historical matchmaking in the past. As somebody who's been around for many years in War Thunder, I feel like there's a lot of ideas which are always brought up, which have been tried or have at least had some kind of version of them attempted in the past with varying results. So I think it's useful to kind of go through them and see what ended up happening with them. By the way, there is already some kind of historical matchmaking that goes into the game. The reason why certain vehicles don't go down in BR like they should is because of the fact that there are certain beliefs between the Gaijin team that they shouldn't go down because they don't want them to face specific types of vehicles. If you remember this was the whole stabilizer non-stabilizer idea, and also at the same time when they talked about the fact that certain vehicles with certain technologies shouldn't face other vehicles with other technologies. An example of this is the M113. The M113A1 specifically is a terrible vehicle at 8.3, and it's outmatched by pretty much every vehicle that's around, but they don't want to put it down in BR because it might face vehicles that can't deal with the A2 gem. which to me is kind of ridiculous, but it just shows you that these types of ideas are in the game right now and affecting certain parts of it. Now, when it comes to events and stuff that have happened in the past, I thought it might be worth just kind of going through some. First of all, we had, back in the day, a difference in the realistic battle area. So nowadays we have arcade battles, realistic battles, and simulator battles. Back in the day, realistic battles were called historical battles. So this was way long ago, probably 9 or 10 years ago, or maybe even 8 years ago, and they changed it to realistic battles because it better kind of reflected what was actually going on. Historical battles were never actually historical, even way back in the day. You had many different battles which were not stuff that actually happened in history and were known as alternate history battles. For example, you had an alternate history battle in Berlin, where America and USSR kind of teamed up to fight Germany, or it was America versus the USSR there. Then you also had the alternate history battle of the preparation of Hokkaido, which was, of course, one of those which happened quite a lot, and that was America versus Britain that used to be there. Then you would also have stuff like the USSR versus Japan, and basically just the odd matchups which wouldn't make sense in a historical context. So even in the historical battle mode, there wasn't historical battles, and there was still the BR system or the level system, depending on which time you're looking at, and both of those had historical lineage, basically. So they were more based on balance, and if you ran into some historical stuff, that's just because of, the fact that they kind of lined up with the balance of the game. So that's why they changed the name of it. It wasn't because it was, changing or shifting from historical to ahistorical. It was always ahistorical. It's just they changed it because it better fitted it. The next one is World War II Chronicles. So World War II Chronicles used to be a event, or Chronicles of World War II, depending on what year you're looking at. It was a yearly event, which happened for a few years. Sometimes it happened in April, sometimes it happened in May, but the major thrust of it, I'll leave some links in the description so you can see some different stuff. The main thrust of it is you would play through historical operations. So they would give you a bunch of operations, such as, Operation Barbarossa, and you have to play the German troops invading the USSR, and it would be in the events tab, so it was outside of standard matchmaking, and you would have a tab where if you played in it, you had a certain set of challenges that you had to complete, and once you completed usually it was like there was 5 challenges, and then you had to complete like 3 of them out of the 5, and then you would get access to the setup. So, for example, there was a Chronicle Award for tankers. You had to defeat 40 or 20 or 14 enemies in A, B, R, B, and SB, get the supporting fire achievement 5 times, and at least 2,000 points in 8 battles, win 10 battles with activity of 70%, or defeat 11, 6, or 4 players in 1 battle while controlling ground vehicles. So you would have this setup, and you had to complete 3 out of the 5 of them in order to get the Chronicle Awards. But you could only do it in the actual events tab in that specific World War II Chronicles event that was going on at the same time. So they would set up historical events such as the attack on Pearl Harbor, such as stuff like the beginning of the Battle of Stalingrad, and they would only give you the vehicles that were present in that area. So imagine if you had pages of history, but instead of being able to take it into standard matchmaking, you were only allowed to play in a specific game mode, which was there. Now, you can imagine what this led to, right? Because you have a bunch of challenges. If you complete the challenges, then eventually you would get the vehicles. And there were some kind of cool ones which were there. The T-18E2, the Tandem Mai, the Lorraine, all of these were pretty enjoyable. Even the Whirlwind was there in one of them too. So what ended up happening is everybody just played the powerful side. Every single time. Because one of the challenges was to win, and another one of the challenges was to get a bunch of kills. So you had one or two options. Did you want to sit in a queue for ages because there was nobody queuing for the other side, or did you want to squad up with a bunch of people and try and win from the side which was massively downtrodden? Because the win rates were just nuts when it came to one side versus the other. And the only way you could kind of balance them is if you had a good enough group of players that you could play together with to be able to fight the enemy team. And that obviously isn't open to the vast majority of people. So what this ended up happening is landslide battles, and then in future seasons they tried to balance this through spawn points. So the more powerful vehicles, for example, if you're playing Normandy and you're playing Germany, you wouldn't get access to the Tiger at the start of the battle, or the Panther either. You had to get enough spawn points in order to spawn in them. And then, of course, the other side would get stuff like Cromwells and Sherman 75s, and sometimes the 17-pounder, the Sherman Firefly, to be able to fight the Tigers and Panthers. So if the German team was able to get a good start to the battle, you just lost, and there was nothing you could do. But if they didn't get a good start to the battle, then you just hammered them. So yeah, it's one of those things which was, once again, very unbalanced once people figured out the meta and figured out what to go for. One of the key reasons why they removed World War II Chronicles is because of the fact that people were not getting into matches because so many people were queuing on one side of the matchmaker, and this meant that people weren't getting their challenges done, and since people have limited time per day, it meant that they weren't able to do it and got frustrated and annoyed at the system. So now we have the Page of History system, which is much more easier for people to deal with because you can do it in standard matchmaking. And it doesn't force people to use specific vehicles. It means that if people want to use the specific vehicles, they can do, but other people don't have to. And that's huge in terms of this. And the Chronicles of World War II showed this over and over and over again. People do not like being forced to play specific stuff, especially when it's massively imbalanced. What ends up happening is people just leave and don't get involved. Then we have World War Mode. World War Mode has 3 seasons. World War Mode is kind of like a tactical, I suppose, hexagonal kind of RTS where you have one commander, and what ends up happening is with that commander, he kind of positions the troops all over the place, and then once the battles are created, a squad of people can go into the battles and fight them, and overall it's really cool. It worked okay. There was a lot of bugs and a lot of issues with the servers, but the general concept, if it was like a PvE thing, was really, really fun. The problem is they made it PvP and they made it competitive. And when that started happening, once you have 2 sides of a coin, people are going to figure out which one ends up, landing on heads or tails more, and they're just going to bet on that one over and over and over again. This is exactly what happened in World War Mode. So since you had a ranking system, and since the ranking system gave you prizes depending on where you were on it, if you were part of a squad who was actually taking this seriously, you'd only queue one side of the event because that was the favored side. And if you queued the other side of the event, you would be unfavored. So you would have to go up against the better squads and also know that you're probably not going to win, because of the fact that there was some very obvious imbalances in the modes, because they were based on historical precedents. The Season 1 was Recon Under Fire, and also Season 2 was Attack from the Sea. Both of these were all based around historical events and operations, and there was some very obvious ones where they had to do a bunch of rebalancing to them because of the fact that they were so imbalanced in one way or the other. And then you had Season 3, Road to the West, which came in, which is an ahistorical setup of the Battle of the Fulda Gap. The good old 1980s going hot once again, which is a tale as old as time that we've heard about in video games. But once again, they had to move to an ahistorical area to try and balance all of these things, because unfortunately, they just weren't balanced. Even in the operations which were more balanced, there was always still a favoured side. And once people figured it out, everybody queued for that side. So you were stuck in matchmaking for an hour, 2 hours, and what would end up happening is you would face somebody who was just one guy who wanted to force battles so he could get the event done, instead of actually fight properly. So yeah, even World War II Chronicles, even the World War mode, which was designed as more of a competitive thing, just showed that if you have only two sides to a fight, the vast majority of people are going to pick the side which has the 55 or the 60% win rate. And once they do that, it doesn't matter if you queue for the other side, because you just won't have enough people queuing, and therefore people will just be stuck not doing anything for ages and will eventually leave the game mode, which is one of the big things that happened and continues to happen in these situations. So historical matchmaking is not something that's new, and obviously there are many, or well, maybe not many, but there's at least a few of the Gaijin development team that do agree with the ideas of having something that's historical, but it just doesn't work. Even with events like the Flight of the Swallows event, and also a few others that were happened, which for some reason get this weird kind of miasma around them, as if they're like this magical things that used to happen in the past, and for some reason they just took them away from us. Every so often they would bring in events like the Flight of the Swallows event, which is basically defending a bunch of B-17s with P-51s against Me-262s, and people have very fond memories of these because of the fact that they happened 7, 8 or 9 years ago. They actually brought the Flight of the Swallows event back recently, so that should kind of show you that they are at least, giving it a go and kind of showing it to people. But the problem with the Flight of the Swallows event was the same thing. As a person who was back around then, what people would do is they would actually just queue for one side, and they would only play that one side, and it was usually Germany in the Me-262, because you couldn't be touched, and if you didn't have the 262 and if you decided to play the other side, it was ridiculous and manic, and you would probably win because, the 262s would just wander around and not really do anything, but you wouldn't have any fun. And fun was the part of that event, because you didn't really get a lot of research from it, you didn't really get a lot of, anything from it, so it was just one of those which just didn't work very well. And every single historical type of thing, when it comes to matchmaking they've done, has ended up in that way. You have two sides, one side is slightly favoured because of the historical setup, everybody plays that side. The same thing happens in Simulator all the time, and Simulator isn't even based around, anything historical anymore. It used to be, but now it's just based around the BR system. But even now with that, you still have the similar issue, where people queue for the stronger side because they want to win and they want to do well. It's a great kind of microcosm of what is going on in the kind of external part of the game. And I wish we would just be honest about these things. People don't play the worst side. I know there are some people who are like, well, I've only grinded that nation, so of course I'll play. And it's like, that's fine, okay? That's fine if you think that. But as somebody who's just been around and had to play a lot of these things over the years, there's a reason why they don't exist anymore, and it's because of that. If you have a thought about these things, and it's important to, think through and go through them, you have to ask yourself a simple question. Since all of these things have been tried before, and since all of them have even been given a lot of development time and a lot of their own game modes and a lot of this, why don't they exist today? And then maybe you'll find your answer. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.